Welcome to the year-end edition of the Braver Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm your host, Ciaran O'Connor. "2020 is almost over. It was a year of pain, isolation, deep uncertainty, really a year of fragility for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But it was also a year of hope, perseverance, and a reminder that, for better or worse, we're all in this together. Being that it's the end of the year, I wanted to gather a crew of our Braver Angels podcasters, anyone who could make it, to come on and have a friendly discussion to reflect on the year we just had at Braver Angels, in our communities, and in America, and to look ahead to 2021 as we work to build a house united. I am joined today by Alma Cook and Randy Lioz, and our indomitable colleague April Lawson may be hopping on as well. But the three of us can kick things off. Alma and Randy, welcome to the podcast. We are almost through 2020.
Best year ever.
Yeah, quite a year. It's a great to have an opportunity to reflect on it.
It is. So I guess let's start on a more positive note. Randy, what was your favorite part of 2020?
Yeah, I think the favorite thing for me was really taking on the challenge of bringing our workshops to an online environment. And the moment that stands out for me there was when we did our first national online workshop, and the reception that had. It was so clear that there was a lot of hunger that was built up for resuming workshops and for connecting with people, especially because we were certainly in a time where, everyone was locked down, but we hadn't really gotten used to it yet. And so people were just really hungering for connection and didn't really know how to have that. And so when we launched that first national workshop, we actually got so many donations. We got the highest level of donations that we've gotten from any event previously. And it was just really satisfying as a representation of how appreciative the people were at the work that we were doing. So that was great. And just the experience of helping to build that structure that allowed us to do it was personally for me just a big growth experience. So that was fantastic.
Yeah, totally. I remember in February we were transitioning from Better Angels to Braver Angels and acknowledging the fact that bringing Americans together in 2020 would require something more than civility and respect and empathy. It would also require courage. Little did we know that we were about to be confronted with a pandemic that would threaten lives and threaten really our whole experiment in ordered liberty. And as you mentioned, up until that point, the vast majority of our work had been based on intimate face-to-face gatherings. And as the nation shut down and people were staying home to protect each other, I think there was a real question of how Braver Angels would respond. But in true Braver Angels fashion, our volunteers sprang into action to bring our work online. They adapted programs, digitized access, and they spent a whole lot of time on Zoom. And I think by all accounts, it was a remarkable success. Even if you do lose some of the magic and intimacy that you get from on the ground face-to-face work, it really helped us meet people where they are and scale our work in new ways. Because at the end of the day, it's a much lighter lift to hop on Zoom for 2 hours than to go to a full day on the ground workshop. And I think for some people too, it's a little more comfortable. Folks who might not be as comfortable in new social situations, you can always just turn off your video and listen if you want. So I think we were all encouraged by the results. And we started being able to do debates that were regularly attended by up to and surpassing 1,000 people. And so I think we were able to make some lemonade out of those lemons. And it also gave us a kick in the pants to do something that we had wanted to do for a long time. And so that was something that really spoke to the can-do nature of Braver Angels, and I think has positioned us in some ways to be even more powerful in 2021 than we would have been if we had just sort of continued on the path of more face-to-face workshops.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, I've been thinking about the theme of making lemonade from lemons. And I think we did that in a variety of ways. And one of the things that I was thinking about was the contrasting factors that really set us up for this year. You know, we had a pretty big challenge in that we were already challenged in our fundraising, and that was always a looming issue for us. But of course, when the pandemic occurred, lots of nonprofits were impacted by funding sources pulling back. And so it seemed to compound that challenge. But at the same time, because we were meeting this overall national challenge of the pandemic with a really productive approach, and because during an election year, it was so apparent how important our work was to the country, that helped to offset the funding challenges that we were experiencing, and helped us to turn this into more of an opportunity.
And one of the other great blessings of 2020 was the emerging presence of Alma Cook, who has now become a key member of the podcast team and has also helped lead our work in the area of music. And I don't know if everyone who follows Braver Angels is aware of the songwriting team and all the work that we've done to use music to bring people together. Alma, can you talk a little bit about what it's been like for you just getting involved with Braver Angels in general, and in particular, helping bring your passion to Braver Angels and lead the work of the songwriting group to really sort of open up this whole new area of our work?
Oh, sure. It's hard to even know where to start because I've just been in this flurry of meetings and Slack chats and email threads with all of you. What seems like overnight, I just went from 0 to 100. You guys talked a bit about the baseline that you guys were coming from out of 2019 and so forth, but I have no sense of what the baseline was like because I'm so new on the block. Really what happened was I, like so many other people, were just feeling the heaviness, particularly around June. Tensions were high. I was living in downtown Los Angeles, which of course was undergoing a bit of heat. And I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts, the Glenn Lowry Show. He's an economist and just a brilliant thinker. And John Wood Jr., our very own John Wood Jr., was featured on the show. And I was so moved by his call to just see one another as brothers and sisters, and give people a chance, a seat at the table, even if you feel like they're being so undignified that they don't deserve one. And it moved me to tears. And so I DM'd him on Twitter. I just DM'd John on Twitter and said, hey, I really liked your spiel. I was very, very moving. I noticed you live in the Los Angeles area. Could we do a social distance coffee or whatever? And from then on, it's just been like, oh, suddenly I'm on the music committee. Oh, suddenly I'm co-chair of the music committee. Oh, I'm performing at this event. I'm performing at that. Now I'm involved in the podcast. I'm helping social media. And it's been such a joy. And I wish I could better distill, where I necessarily think the music committee is going, or how we specifically want to use music in 2021, but I still feel like I'm learning and figuring that out along the way. So, one big thing that we're excited about is bringing in voices, cultural leaders that people already respect. So let's say I don't know who your favorite singer is, Randy or Ciaran, but let's say it's Macklemore or Ariana Grande or somebody. and you notice them speaking out about something on Instagram or Facebook, one of their political passions, left, right, probably left. Let's be honest, a lot of musicians are leaning that way. But we want to start inviting those people into our conversations because they know they bring with them new eyes and ears, particularly younger eyes and ears that wouldn't necessarily otherwise be paying attention. And willing to join our cause. So that's one thing that we have in our pocket. But of course, as you mentioned, the songwriting contest is still very much a part of who we are. We have a whole community of people really budding around that. So that's a little bit of preview of what's to come.
And I see we've just been joined by April. April, we've begun by reflecting a little bit on 2020 and some of our favorite moments, some of the challenges. Alma was saying that she first got introduced to Braver Angels during the summer when she heard John on a podcast. And obviously this summer saw nationwide protests and some of the rawest fault lines and divides in American life spilling out into full view. And I think there was another inflection point for Braver Angels where we had to figure out, how do we respond to what's happening in the streets? How do we lean headfirst into some of these really painful topics that some people might consider a third rail, or things that you shouldn't even talk about if you want to bring people together? But we decided that we wanted to test our method in the crucible. And so we launched our 2020 campaign by focusing on race in America and by hosting a series of debates on police reform, criminal justice, reparations. And I think that was really powerful for me to see how our work responded at such a critical time for the country. And I think it really demonstrated the power of our work, to be able to talk about things with compassion, but also with honesty, and in ways that we tried to hold each other accountable. So, Alma, I guess I'd love to hear a little bit more just on a personal level. What was the summer like for you? What was it like in a pandemic when you started seeing what was happening in the streets and what was happening on TV? And how did Braver Angels play into that as a potential venue or positive way to confront that energy?
Well, I think it speaks to what was going on, to notice in myself how afraid I am to even weigh in on that. More heavy even than it was to look outside my literal window and see dumpster fires and see businesses who had boarded up their shop and written minority owned on the plywood to protect themselves from what they thought was coming. Was the fear of losing my own friends. There was a lot of just a lot of tension that hadn't been stirred up before, and a sense of urgency, a sense of revolution that is so useful at times to lead us toward change, positive change, but also so prone to leave us thinking that we should accomplish our ends by any means necessary, even if it means cutting out our friends or saying words that we wouldn't normally say to somebody. So yeah, I think of the summer as more of an internal battle than an external one for me. I was the one who would receive texts from other friends who were feeling a little bit afraid of what was going on, and they viewed me as some kind of safe space. I don't know how, but people saying there's almost this game theory of you drop a little hint to show where you might stand, and then you hope the other person is safe enough to not bite your head off for even insinuating something. So I don't know, what I've found in Braver Angels in the midst of that was the freedom to actually to breathe and speak and know that the people on the other end of the line are still going to welcome you as family, whatever it is that comes out of your mouth. We're all here with this common cause, and we're here trying to accomplish something good and bring forth the well-being of our country on a new level. And I don't know that I lost track of your question even in answering this, because I'm almost tearing up just reflecting on how challenging the summer was. But Brave Angels definitely this year has meant safety to me in the midst of very relationally and emotionally unsafe times.
Thank you. And Randy, I know that you wrote a piece in response to some of the events this summer, particularly about Kyle Rittenhouse, who was a young white man who people in Kenosha, Wisconsin, I believe, and it became sort of a lightning rod. Can you talk a little bit about, what you said in the piece and what it was like for you to write that and the reaction that you've encountered afterwards?
Yeah. So we actually had an event recently where I got a chance to lead a discussion based on the article that I wrote. And one of the questions that someone had asked me was, why did I choose to dig into that incident in such detail? And that one in particular. And what I realized at the moment that I was answering the question was that I had seen reactions from both sides about the issue that really denied the subtlety, denied all of the details, that kind of ignored the details that were really important to the other side in making their own case. But there was so much video evidence available about what had happened. And if you really looked at it closely, you saw that subtlety emerge. And I thought that was really important detail that needed to be brought out. And so what my overall conclusion for the piece was, we have this reaction of automatically assuming the worst of the other side. And it sets us up with these hair triggers, for our weapons pointed at each other. And we're so ready to react to any slight or any perceived evil deed on the other side with such vociferousness that it kind of reinforces the other side's view of us as evil. And it's a cycle that is just it's a heavy downward spiral. And so if we take the time to kind of process what we're seeing in the incident, and at the beginning of that discussion, I also asked the question, is this a Rorschach test? Much like some of the other things that we've seen in the news. And the first thing that really struck me in that way was the Covington Catholic case, where there was video of some high school students confronting a Native American man, and the first clip was very narrow, and then we got to see more and more and more. And really, what ended up happening was whatever you wanted to see in that case is what you saw. And I thought that the exact same thing happened with the Rittenhouse case, and I think it's just a really important. It's an important instance of our overreactions to really take a close look at and say, okay, how can we personally stop this cycle? Because we can only control what we do, right? We can't control the reactions that people on the other side have. So the key to stopping that cycle is for us to step back and say, okay, let me think about this before I react, and let me perhaps make some kinder, more charitable assumptions about the people who believe something very differently about this incident.
And April, first, welcome to the podcast. Secondly, I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about your own experience this summer, particularly given that you lead our debates program, and debates became our primary vehicle for engaging these issues of police violence, racial injustice, election 2020. What was it like for you personally And how did you think about your own leadership of the debates, given the stakes involved?
Yeah, well, you just said one of the key words there, which is stakes. It was very intense. And, you know, I'm not pretending that my experience was more intense than a lot of other folks, per se. Like, I'm not a comparative statement, but it was really intense. And the reason was that we immediately, so the mixed blessing, but blessing of being in a position like mine as the person who runs debates for Braver Angels is that you have the capacity to act. You have the capacity to contribute, to do something. And the good thing about that is, like, oh my gosh, in a moment when like everyone wants to fight for what's right and do something good and like be part of a better future, you actually have the capacity to like to do, and that feels great. And that's true of all of us. Yeah, that's one of the things that makes me love this work. The complexity is that you also have the responsibility that comes with that, right? You have sometimes you have the responsibility to act, sometimes you have the responsibility not to act. And mostly you are required to make judgment calls on when to act and how, and they will have some consequences. And so the first proposal was to do a debate immediately right after it happened and to try to have that like be a major media event and all this. And then Bill Doherty sort of talked us down and was like, no, this is a moment of real trauma. A debate is not appropriate right now. And I was eventually won over by that and thought, yeah, that's actually really right. But then I was hearing from other sides like, no, we have to debate this. This is on people's minds. Not talking about it isn't the answer. And so there was just a lot of pressure and a lot of back and forth and a lot of like, when do we talk about this? How do we talk about this? Braver Angels is not yet where it needs to be in terms of representation from people of color. And so how do we have a conversation about this that's appropriate when it's not a representative, if the crowd is not representative? How are the folks, are African Americans even wanting to talk about this stuff right now? And we heard a range of responses, incidentally, to that exact question from African Americans, some of which were like, yes, we need to talk about this. And others were like, heck no, like, absolutely not. This is not when we're talking about this. This is when we're fighting. And the time for talking is over. And so there was just a lot of intensity and pressure. And then the other thing in my personal life is that I am engaged to a police officer and who until recently also had a civilian day job with the police department. And so, and the effects on his well-being were really, so there was just this, there was a lot of pressure at work. And then at home, there was sort of even more, not pressure exactly, but just need to, frankly, he shut down for a while. And so there was just the need to like figure out how to support him and how to help us all get through this. And then his best friend and also a close friend of mine who's sometimes on this podcast, Alice Kulkarni, believes deeply in racial justice and was activating in a different direction and anyway, basically what I'm saying is and so then he and Dan weren't always seeing eye to eye because Dan was seeing the police side more and Silas was seeing the African Americans more, and there was just it was just a lot. And I'm pleased with where we eventually came down. I don't think we did everything right, but I do think that we were right not to do an event immediately that was about the argument. We were right to give it breathing room, give it space. We were right to put together two kinds of events after a couple weeks had passed. Was the sort of a member meeting that was a sort of smaller private gathering that invited African Americans and police officers, and in some cases, African American police officers, to speak about what this had been like for them and just reflect on it. I hear that I'm cutting out. So sorry about that. I'm going to turn off my video for the moment. Yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm near a different Wi-Fi source than usual. So all this to say, oh my gosh, it was intense. And I'm pretty happy with how we performed. We did some smaller, more private events, and then we also offered an opportunity for regular folks, our people, and a lot of new folks too, to engage these questions and to speak their minds and to try to wrestle through it. And of course, we planned that carefully. We made sure that there were both police officers and people of color among the speakers. Also, but I have to tell you, they were some of our most popular events, some of our most powerful events. And I learned things at every single one. So did everyone who chaired them. And so, for example, I learned a lot. We had some social workers who attended who gave their perspective on what it would be like for them to respond to, say, a domestic violence call. And it just was, it was an enormously powerful thing. And frankly, I felt like we took a risk in saying, no, we're braver angels. We're going to do this. Not talking is not the answer. Not sharing our views openly cannot be the answer here. And so we have to engage. But we'll do it carefully. We'll do it thoughtfully. And it was just a resounding success. It made me, it redoubled my belief both in our work, but also in people, that if you give people a setting, if you give them just our debates, right, have only 3 or 4 rules, like some really basic supports, they can do this. They can do democracy, they can do society, they can do social change, they can do relationship with people who are really different. Like, we can do this. And it made me proud to be part of Braver Angels.
Isn't it funny? It's so funny that the name change happened right before all of this went down, right?
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Yep.
That's incredible. Ciaran, Can we flip this question on you? Maybe not specifically about all the heaviness of the summer, but what stood out to you about this year?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was actually going to say, after our focus in July on race in America, we then turned to Trump's America. And the context for that is that Braver Angels seeks to have, as much as possible, equal representation between reds and blues, folks who lean conservative, folks who lean liberal. Obviously, the majority, or the vast majority even potentially, of reds do support the president. And we were cognizant of the fact that we had not been able to engage Trump supporters as we'd liked. Our membership leaned blue, and our reds were disproportionately comprised of never Trump Republicans. And so we wanted to make a conscious effort in September, as the campaign season was really heating up, to take up issues of particular concern to conservative-leaning Americans and to highlight, engage with, challenge, get to know, empower Trump supporters. And who better to lead this effort than a liberal from New York City? And so it was a very interesting experience for me, given my own politics and my role helping oversee our media and public outreach, to try to make a real effort to do that, and to do it in such an intense, pressurized environment. And I think I learned a lot about the interplay between my own politics and the goals of Braver Angels. I remember in particular, I was dedicating a series of the podcasts to interviews with Trump supporters. And my first podcast, I talked to Carlos Hernandez, who's one of our leaders at Braver Angels. He's a Latino from San Francisco, a Trump supporter, incredibly powerful speaker. He came on the podcast, and we had a frank and candid conversation about the president. And I was sort of trying to get at the issue that I think a lot of liberals have, or the question, which, essentially is, how do you see the tension between the goals of Braver Angels more empathy, more honesty, more compassion, and the ways in which President Trump comports himself on the public stage, which one could obviously argue often embody the opposite of those virtues. And it was interesting because there was a fallout to the podcast from Carlos and others who felt like my questions had been unfair, or I had abused my position as a podcast host to, paint them in a corner. And it was sort of an interesting experience for me to think about the goals of the entire engagement and how to go about the conversation, because there's kind of this tension at Braver Angels where we want to be as welcoming as possible. But as April said, we also are Braver Angels, and we don't want to shy away from the tough issues. And I think one of the pieces of context here was that sometimes when you're a leader at Braver Angels, there's an expectation that you are functioning more as a neutral arbiter rather than someone who has his or her own politics and policies. And I think we need to do a better job of making the point that we want our leaders at Braver Angels to be able to express themselves, but we want to do so on a level playing field. And I think that's one of the complaints that we get from conservatives a lot, is they don't feel like Braver Angels is a level playing field. Just that a lot of them don't feel like popular culture or the mainstream media is a level playing field. And so that was an interesting experience for me. And I think overall the campaign was effective in terms of lifting up and empowering Trump supporting folks within our organization, making them feel like they had a venue where they could make their voice heard. But I don't think we've really cracked the nut at Braver Angels. I think.
Are you calling conservatives nuts? I'm just kidding.
I don't think that we have very many people at Braver Angels who are truly, on the Trumpian bandwagon, even if they voted for President Trump. And I think that's something that's going to be interesting to see how it develops in 2021 when Joe Biden is the president. Randy, I saw you put your hand up to that one.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point and an interesting dynamic. And I think it's not actually limited to the red side. I think, we talk a lot about the idea of Braver Angels being that we don't want people to moderate their viewpoints. We want them to communicate them in a more productive manner that doesn't alienate the other side and doesn't, demonize the other side. And I think that we still face a challenge of attracting, hardcore, true blue progressives. I consider myself a fairly strong progressive, and I think that I tend to be a little bit more vociferous in my progressivism than a lot of the other blues that I work with at Braver Angels. And it's not, I don't want to make a blanket generalization, because I think there are a decent number of strong blues, but I think we do in general attract people who are fairly moderate in their views and want space for those views to be expressed, right? Because our media landscape is such that, moderate views don't really get air at all. And so that, we certainly do, give a platform for more nuanced views of things. And I really appreciate that. But I also want us to be a platform for people who are really passionate about what they believe and think that the Braver Angels mission is actually really good for them as staunch partisans, because, if we're in a marketplace of ideas, then everyone should believe that the strongest ideas are going to win out as long as there is an open exchange of those ideas, right? And so I really want to make the case, and as a blue, I think it's my place to make that case to my fellow blues, just as our red leaders are in a good position to make that case to their strong reds, especially Trump supporting reds. But I think that people who consider themselves social justice warriors and really want to make a big change in our society would be more effective in their mission if they actually started to speak in a way that resonated with people of the other side, and actively tried not to alienate those people, and didn't believe that that speaking in that way was a betrayal of their beliefs, because it's not. It's actually a more effective advocacy of those beliefs. So I think that's a really important message for us.
Speaking my language, Randy, people think that debate is like a bad thing, and we have to it just doesn't have to be, right? Like that's one of the, I think, the lies in that sort of underlies some of our culture of politeness these days, is that the you can't really say everything. You have to hold back, don't talk politics and religion at the dinner table, right? All that stuff. When in fact, what's true is, thank you for the reminder not to put my video on, sorry. When in fact, what's true is that people can talk about anything as long as they do it in the right spirit. They really, really can. And now that spirit can be hard to maintain because, as Bill would tell you, when it's your family who's saying that horrible thing or who believes crazy idea or whatever, it gets harder to keep your cool. But that's not because of the subject matter. And it's, I think that we have to sort of relearn how to trust each other enough that we believe sincerely that whatever that person is saying, is they're trying to work out the right answer. And they may not have it, right? Absolutely. But that they really are trying, their heart really is in the right place. And to just, it's sort of like, just stick with them long enough to see how it makes sense to them. And then how you can, I feel like people kind of give up on each other a little bit. And we are learning that, that you don't have to. That debate can be a good thing, that you can love each other for the ways that you guys are different. Actually, I think that one of the things that Braver Angels, if we do things right, can offer the world is the reminder that we can love each other for differences, not in spite of them. And now there are lots of other groups that would say that they're about that, but I think that we can walk the walk in a way that really will help people see it.
And I'd love to add one thing to that. We lean on President Lincoln as an inspiration for us. He was obviously the source of our first name. My favorite Lincoln quote is, "I don't like that man. I must get to know him better." And I think that it speaks to April's point that we should be making better assumptions about one another's motivations in general. I hold the view overall in life that people are generally good and that they're trying to do the right thing, but we have a bunch of, life is incredibly complex, and it makes us make these really difficult decisions that will often impact some people negatively and other people positively. But I think that if we do, in general, get back to that base assumption that people are trying to do the right thing, which I think is 99% of the time true, and it's not always the case, but I think it's mostly true, then we'll be much better for it. We'll actually benefit from that assumption as well.
Mm-hmm. I love that Lincoln quote. That's so good, Randy. Thank you for sharing that. And I agree that base assumption is so key. One thing that I'm struggling to still figure out, as the new kid on the block, is when it's appropriate to go full partisan and when it's appropriate to moderate your own beliefs. I mean, I know, when I first joined Braver Angels, my only experience with BA was on the music committee. I hadn't been to any debates. I hadn't been to any of the national events or workshops. I only saw the music committee who was together, trying to plan certain logistical endeavors. And I had no idea, even when I became the red co-chair of the music committee, that my blue co-chair was as ardent in his beliefs that he was. It wasn't until I got on the phone with him one day and started speaking with him much more casually that he started to, use words I'd never hear him use before. And he wasn't being disrespectful or beyond the pale, but I was just like, whoa, man. Like I didn't know that you felt that strongly, because the version of him that I'd gotten within the BA setting was a much more neutral, middle of the road, like Democrat. And I don't know, I'm struggling to figure out, maybe you guys have some opinions on this, when it's appropriate to let that stuff out, when it's appropriate to be a little bit more milquetoast, I guess.
Yeah, I think I also struggle with that. And I think Randy hit on it pretty well when he said productive. So one thing I'm trying to think about is keeping that in mind. I mean, sometimes it's personally satisfying for me to let loose on Trump or elements of American society that I think are cancerous. But it's not always productive if the larger aim is progressivism, depolarization, de-radicalization, or basic humanization. And so I think that's something that I try to keep more in mind, is like, this going to be productive, or especially, is this going to be counterproductive? And if it's going to be counterproductive and it's really just serving to feed my own insecurities about how I might be perceived by people I agree with, then that's probably telling me that there's more work to do.
I think, so first of all, I would say that my dream is for all of us at Braver Angels, and that includes our listeners too, to be sort of the vanguard of people who are able to have our intense beliefs and communicate them in a way that is just works. And I think we can do that right now. I mean, like, the easiest way to do it is within a structure, right? And so our debates and our workshops are clear structures, but I don't think that's actually required. I think this can be done in regular conversation. However, it's very different from it's not easy at all. And so I feel like we're all still feeling out a little bit, like, where are those boundaries? What is the right way to say this? Like, how do I navigate the fact that certain words mean really different things? Means is threatening to some people and like a shibboleth to others. And so my dream is that we could all learn to do this and sort of be leaders in that way. And I guess in terms of like the actual day-to-day, our best people still have trouble with this, right? Like there's no leader I know of in Braver Angels who doesn't struggle with this sometimes. And I suppose I would have to admit that what I find myself doing, Alma, I liked your, the thing you said about how you sort of send out little tests, like, what if I say this word? How do you react to that? What if I say that word? How do you react to that? To get a sense of the other person before like going fully into something, I believe. And I don't know that that's the answer, but that is what I tend to do. And the other thing is that I find my anthropologist training really helpful in the sense that I think that if I can understand, or let me say that differently, this actually might be more useful to other people. I listen for people's hearts, their moral heart. And so like when I listen to Randy, I hear a real, like I hear a beating heart there that really cares about the possibility of a better world, right? Like the idea that things actually could be better, that we don't have to settle for what we have now, that like that we need to be bold, we need to take risks. And it's because I feel like I can hear his dreaming and his ambition, and I mean ambition in the best possible way, the like moral ambition for something better. And so then when he says things that I'm like, well, that will never work internally, what I can respond to is the heart in it. And that's a thing that I think can be done with almost anybody.
Yeah, I'd love to address it as well. I wrote a newsletter recently that talked about a conversation that I had with a Red who was thinking about getting involved with Braver Angels and wanted to feel us out and see what we were all about. And towards the beginning of our conversation, he actually he started to talk about Joe Biden and how much of a liar he thought he was. And obviously, I see the president-elect very differently, so I said, look, I have a different perspective on this, but I didn't launch into what that perspective was. And one of the reasons, which I was very transparent about, was that he and I didn't have a relationship. This was the first time I'd ever talked to the guy, right? And so one of the, when you look at the structure of our Red Blue workshop, for example, Bill has structured that very, very carefully to build the trust and goodwill between the two sides gradually over the course of, when it's in person, it's one day, and we now do 2 sessions online. And so over that first session, the first half where you do the stereotypes exercise, where you get to talk about, stereotypes that are unfairly targeting you, and the fishbowl exercise where you get to just talk freely about what are your pros and cons about your own side and things like that. It really helps to build the goodwill over the course of that day. So when you get to that third exercise, which is questions and answers, where you get to directly ask the other side the burning questions that you really have, that have been gnawing at your head, you are in a mode where you have built that trust and you said, okay, I've seen them be self-reflective. I know that they have the ability to dig deep and see, all right, what are the real implications of what I'm asking them? So I said to the guy, look, I don't think this is, like as Ciaran said, emphasize the word productive. I don't think this would be productive for us because we haven't built that relationship yet. And so when you, Alma, when you are kind of tossing out those feelers, it may be because your relationship isn't necessarily at the point where you can have full confidence in how that other person is going to respond, right? So that's in and of itself a kind of relationship building exercise. So I think, yeah, that relationship building is paramount to the ability to talk productively to someone on the other side. And because we're all human beings who would like to be influential, that, any hope of influencing anyone depends on whether they trust us.
Yeah, I have just one more thing to say about that. And thank you, Randy. I agree. I think trust is what this whole game is about, right? And like, that's, it's funny because the thing that you actually can come to trust is somebody's heart. It's not their ideas. It's not, not that y'all don't have fantastic ideas, of course, but like, it's less that than it is aspects of their heart and their character. And so, for example, Ciaran is, I hear something different when I listen to him than I do when I listen to Randy. I hear a little bit, I know, Ciaran, that you're quite progressive, and it's funny, but what I hear is a little bit less like ambition for change and a little bit more a like real commitment to looking at realities, whether they're pretty or not. And so I have found you to be one of my most persuasive interlocutors because you are just really dogged in your insistence on looking at like, well, but what does the data actually say here? And which of these narratives actually explains it better? Is it about social justice? Is it about money? Is it about, and one could think I mean cynicism here. I don't. I actually think that you're also very loyal to the best parts of the truth. But I hear this is one of the reasons I think you're a good podcast interviewer, et cetera, because it's a journalistic sensibility towards what's really actually true. And then on the flip side, I find that a lot of Trump supporters, Alma, I would speak to your to your virtues, except we haven't had enough conversations, and also we might agree on everything, so it might not work as well. But with Trump supporters, I often find that I'm a red, but I don't support the president. But I often hear a real something similar actually to what I hear in you, Ciaran, which is a real determination to not be snowed by image and power and style of communication, and to really like listen for, okay, the media is saying all this stuff, but like, what is the actual real truth here? And why is it that we have these beautiful stories and yet they don't seem to capture the suffering that I see in my community, which is economically destitute, or my my church, which is barely surviving, and I also hear a real loyalty to things like family, to the goods that they have known, to their people and their culture as they understand it and all that. And so I just think that oddly, what I wanted to say is simply that your virtue, Ciaran, is one that I hear a lot, interestingly, in those who support the president. And that was unexpected to me. And that as we try to build trust, that if we can learn to listen for, anyway, basically just that's the whole ball game. And if we can learn to listen for what people are actually driving at, it often is very different from what they're saying. And if you can capture what they're driving at, it's usually something you can relate to.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, April. I feel like there's an even deeper level of understanding you're able to reach when you've had a political flip of your own. And I don't know, maybe we can all go around. I mean, April, Randy, Ciaran, have you guys always been on the side of the aisle that you're on, or have you evolved? Nope. Yeah, I mean, I flipped. I flipped very slowly over the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And because of that, when I hear a conservative talk about a liberal, like they just want to control everyone's pocketbooks and these nefarious plans that they have to just manipulate your life, and George Soros, this, like, what? I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, I was that person, and that was definitely not my intention, and I understand that because I was that. But I can't imagine that it would be a little bit harder if you hadn't had that shift internally to be able to give the other side that benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to exposure. And, if you have your own flip, then you naturally have had more exposure to a wider variety of ideas and likely, people as well, at least when it comes to politics. And I think that speaks to what Randy was saying about the power of relationship building and trust building. But even before that is just the very element of exposure itself, because I think one of the most challenging aspects of polarization is that it's from, balkanization, and the fact that we live in silos and increasingly are surrounded with the like-minded, and is further intensified by the fact that we all spend 12 hours a day online, and online you're constantly being bombarded by opinions that not only confirm what you believe, but just dare you to step away from orthodoxy. And so you get conditioned to fear exposure. And what exposure does is it breaks down stereotypes and sort of makes real emotionally, which we all know intellectually, which is that, groups are not monolithic. But when you don't actually get exposed to that, it takes a lot of self-discipline to realize. But when you do get exposed to it through relationships, it's sort of natural, because you can be like, oh, well, my friend Joe's not like that, and we disagree on everything. And so then in your head, that's what you go back to. And one other thing I think I'll say that I think is interesting is that I think people spend so much time focused on national politics and reading about these elites who are in power, right? So Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And so their understanding of the other side is like informed by these people who have a lot of power. over other people. And so you then start ascribing others to people that it's a lot harder to have sympathy for. I feel like it's easy to be cynical when you look at politicians you disagree with and you think are doing things just for power or supporting anti-democratic principles that they know are wrong because they think it's going to serve their own political interests. Whereas for most ordinary people, that doesn't really even come into the calculus. So if your entire opinion of the other side is like formed by these politicians, that's not really the same exposure. Like you think you're exposed and you think you're well informed because you've read like everything that the other side has done in the news, but you actually haven't talked to like ordinary people. I think that then creates a real disconnect too. But at the same time, I do think it's important. I do think there is a difference. Like, I think we should be charitable to everyone. But I think being charitable to ordinary people you disagree with has no cost. But sometimes being too charitable to people in power you disagree with has real cost. For you and your family, you can get taken advantage of, you can get rolled, you can lose elections, et cetera. You can start to see norms being disintegrated. And so that's an interesting thing to keep in mind too, for people who work in politics, is like, how do you hold those two things together? Should you just be like, okay, politician or not politician? That's something that I've been thinking about too, because I do think there is a difference there. And I think people in power will take advantage of the charity of others to grow their own power and to actually feed the forces we're fighting against.
Yeah, Ciaran, one thing that you said made me think about intergroup contact theory, which is, I think, a really powerful principle that, the more that groups are exposed to one another, the more that they tend to get along and see each other positively. And it's, I've talked a lot before about how when you type into Google the word familiarity, the autocomplete that I think almost everyone gets is breeds contempt, because it's just such it's such a common trope. And in my experience, it is just the opposite. And I see Alma actually testing this right now. Let's see if it works out. But yeah, in my experience, familiarity fosters affection. But what I was just thinking about was it depends on the type of familiarity that you're talking about. If the familiarity that you think that you have with the other side is a focused, targeted, purposeful familiarity that your own side has given you, that very narrow window into who they are as people, then yes, absolutely, it is calculated to breed contempt, and it will do just that. But if you decide to look at the whole person, then you're going to realize that there's a lot of aspects of them that you will connect with and that you like, and that probably the thing that was set up as a big contrast with them was overblown, and that it was made out to be much more important than it actually is. Not to say that these differences are unimportant. They can be incredibly important, as you just said, Ciaran, but normally the image that we are fed, and that we actually feed ourselves, right? We do this with social media, and social media helps us to do this to ourselves, because we really take the most interest in the things that foster our existing preconceptions, right? So we've been given these tools to supercharge those proclivities, and so that does actually manifest itself in reality, especially in the world of social media. But in general, the principle is familiarity fosters affection, and I think that we should explore that more and look at the whole person.
Just one quick note on that. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, turning off my video. You're so right that familiarity fosters affection. And what I'd like to just throw in on this subject is that familiarity fosters affection for difference too. Like, it's not just that. So, right, if you think about like your sibling or whatever. So like I have a younger brother named Tim. He's in LA. He's one of my favorite people on the planet. And what I love about him is not just the ways he's the same as me, right? Like it's actually many of my favorite things about him are things that are quite different. And I just think that we have this idea that familiarity means sameness when it doesn't. It actually means acquaintance and sort of like knowing the parameters of another person and like what their patterns are, what their habits are, what the shape of them is as a person. And that's actually what we love. And so the idea that like we need to bond with those who are the same as us, and that's what familiarity has to mean, like that's just totally wrong based on what we all experience of relationships in regular life. So Alma, I think you were doing a little search there. We're curious how it went.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it unfortunately didn't yield the intended result, but that's probably just because I text in a very primitive way and I don't use enough sophisticated quotes. April, I like what you just said, and my biggest heartbreak of 2020 is that I fear that I'm exiting the year with only the friends who are closer to me in their beliefs. Because it seems that one or two of my friends who I'm closest with, who are most different from me, are just maybe not quite up for sticking around through that. And I know that many listeners might be going through that as well, be them reds or blues. And yeah, that's really hard, and I just want to acknowledge that for anyone who's going through it. At the same time, I have this new community with Braver Angels to celebrate, but there is a very real loss that I've experienced and other people are experiencing.
It's sad. Mm-hmm. I was just gonna say it's sad, and I think it's a byproduct of tribalism, as tribes are increasingly oriented around what they oppose versus what they stand for. And so I think that becomes increasingly salient for people. You know, if you don't oppose the same things I do to the same extent, then we don't share the same things that we used to. And I think that's sad because it flattens identity to be based around, one's antipathies, which are important, but they're ultimately corrupting. But at the same time, I also see the flip side, which is where I think, particularly for a lot of progressives, and I think this is true for a lot of Trump supporters too, but sort of like principled opposition to what they see as injustice is sort of like a key orienting light for their identity and their sense of purpose. And so it's also understandable if people feel like you're not down for the cause, then I don't know.
But the cause of friendship is dinner parties and being there for somebody when they need a friend at 3 a.m. and giving someone kombucha when they're sick, running across town to do errands. You know what I mean? Like that's totally the cause of friendship. And
they shouldn't be mutually exclusive.
They shouldn't be.
But I think there's a lot of fear people have that if they, that somehow showing up for people that they love, but who have views that they find foolish or appalling is somehow, compromising their own values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm wondering, I think I really appreciate you saying that, Alma. Made me think about my friends, and I think COVID is a tough environment for friendship, right? And so I have some friends that are growing more distant too. And I agree. I think that in this kind of year, there are all kinds of pressures that just, they make it hard. And what I was wondering is just, I have some hope myself of my relationships. Inauguration, things kind of calm down a little bit, that there can be just some thawing. Sorry, did y'all hear? I don't know if I cut out there.
April, we're losing you right now,
anyway.
Unfortunately.
It cut out a little bit, but I got the.
If you can hear, my basic question, Alma, is: do you think that there is a thaw that's possible in 2021? I'm hoping there will be in my life.
I don't know, to be honest. I mean, when I look at this Zoom call, I see people who make me hopeful that a thaw is possible. But then when I look at, some of my other relationships or these other rooms that I'm in on any given day, I'm not so hopeful. I vacillate a little bit. But I choose to be hopeful, because what is there on the other side of hopelessness? There's nothing for us there. So that's my choice.
Yeah. And it's also courage. I mean, I think hope sustains us, but courage is sort of what helps us make true what we hope for. And I think that's something that I can come back to in 2021. And yeah, I think people are fed up with the current environment. I think that I'm hopeful that having Trump out of the presidency will make our work easier. It's possible that's not true. I'd be curious to hear what others think.
That's interesting. It's definitely a question that I've thought about. I had this theory early on that that one of the reasons that it was tough for braver angels than better angels to attract conservatives was because their party was in power. And so there's not as much of a motivation to engage with the other side, because you can enact your agenda more easily. Obviously, they didn't hold the House, but they had a very powerful position with the presidency, the Senate, and the judiciary. And that I asked a Red about that specifically. He said he didn't feel that was true, and so maybe I'm wrong about that. But I think that it's possible that with the changing of the guard, that there will be some increased motivation from conservatives to reach across. I'm hopeful about that, and if it doesn't happen, I understand. But I would really like to see that happen, and it also makes me think about this question in general about our relationships and our approach to them, and is everyone cut out to be is Braver Angels for everyone? That's a question that's on my mind, because there are some people who, for them, their ideology is so important and so central to their identity that having people in their lives that don't comport with that may actually be maybe more important to them than the relationships with people on the other side. For me, that's very much not the case. And I hope that for a lot of people that's not the case, but I don't know if I can judge people harshly who do come to the conclusion that, well, what I believe is so important that I can't have these people in my life. It's something that I continue to think about, and I don't know. I guess I would be curious to see what other people's thoughts are on that.
I have a sort of strong response to that. So, although I generally attempt to be mild-mannered and diplomatic, my answer to that is yes, it absolutely is for everybody. The deep parts of it are. I think that and I almost would say, and there are some in our crowd who hate war metaphors, but I would almost say that it's like a war, and to the extent that polarization wins, we lose, and to the extent, and so what I want us to get so good at building a powerful, positive community that people actually want to be part of, and helping them see that the best way for them to achieve the justice they seek, or the loyalty to identity that they seek, or whatever it is to have a relationship with the other side, that's when we will win. And so it's not that I agree. I don't judge people harshly for that, making that choice. It's not to me about judgment per se, but I want to win them over. I want to win their hearts. And like, I think that, is that a very practical short-term strategy? No. But part of the reason I love the debates program is because it's for polarized people. It's for people who like are in it to win it, who say like, give me liberty or give me death or give me justice, whatever it is, right? Like, and those are some of the most passionate people around, and we can't afford not to have them fighting for the beloved community that we seek. And so I would say simply, in the short term, am I going to like make my strongest pitch to like that guy who's decided he will not talk to anyone who isn't an NRA member? Probably not, but like, or, there are certainly leftist equivalents, but I don't want to, I'm, as a red, more nervous about talking about them, but it's not my, the next time I'm looking for fundraising, I'm not going to go to them, but we have to have, it's the equivalent of a 50-state strategy, a sort of everybody strategy, because we need those people to be part of if our community is to be the powerful good thing that we want it to be.
April, I love that answer. Yeah. And I think I'm very, very much on board with that idea. And sometimes it can be more difficult to articulate it, especially when talking to people on our own side. And I guess the only thing that left for me to wonder is, in what order? So do we try to connect with everyone at once, or do we start with the people who we think will be more receptive and then progress from there?
I would almost say start with who you love. And so which is a kind of crazy answer because it says both. But Braver Angels has always been about relationships and about alliances, right? Like local people knowing other local people. And so for me, for example, I talk about her a lot somehow in Braver Angels land, but my mother is like one of the most polarized people I know. She, and that's where my involvement in Braver Angels ultimately comes from, is my, the differences in my family politically that we've had to just navigate somehow. Anyway, I would never want to choose a strategy that gives up on people like her in favor of moderates. Not that I don't love moderates, they're great too, but however, I suppose I could come your way a little bit and say that like, there are folks who are more and less open to that. But I guess what I don't want to do is draw the dividing line around how passionately people feel. Maybe how open versus closed they are, but not how passionately they feel.
Definitely agree.
Well, I think that might be a good place to wrap up. But before we do, I would be remiss if I didn't make everyone go around and say what their New Year's resolution is. And I'm going to start with April.
Well, I love New Year's resolutions. I am like a total nerd about this. And I'm still putting the finishing touches on mine. I have 2 days left. But I have two. One of them is, or two at the moment. One of them is, the serious one is, I have forever had a problem with being overscheduled. I am terrible at having margin in my life. And the problem with that is that then when people need you, you don't have the time or you don't have the emotional energy to give them. And I don't want to be that kind of person. I don't want to live that kind of life. I want to be somebody who can show up for people when they need it. And also, show up for myself, I suppose. But so the first thing is I have this whole plan. This year I'm going to succeed at creating margin. This year I'm going to make it. And I will not bore you with the details. They involve rules and an accountability buddy. And anyway, so there's that. Like I said, I'm a nerd for this. The other one is about joy. Most of the things I love the most to do have been squashed by COVID, in particular, dancing, social dancing. And I want to find those again and just do a better job of like, pursuing real play and real joy. So, even in a COVID constrained environment. So that's me.
Randy, tough act to follow.
Indeed. And especially given that I'm not really a New Year's resolution person, because one of the reasons is because I don't have a lot of faith in myself to actually complete them. And so I'm reticent about forming them. But
Want to be my accountability buddy, Randy?
there you go. That's actually that's a great idea, because I think that definitely does help us to achieve the
for
things.
real.
And one of them is actually to find someone or some people who can more effectively complement my skill set. And so I tend to be good with bigger ideas, but less good with execution. And so that's I'd love to engage more with people who are really strong in that sort of thing. And because I have these, like you said, April, I have these ambitions about not just how the world can be, but how my life can be. And I think I've gotten on a pretty good path this year, but I think that there's definitely ways that I can kick that up. And the other thing that I'm thinking about is I generally run almost every morning with my dog, but it's been getting later and later in the day, especially if I don't have an early morning meeting to get running for. And so it is to get back to my schedule of early morning runs and make my dog happy thereby.
Yes, Randy, I love when you have a sweaty towel on your shoulder during Zoom calls. I think we all need to get back to that. Alma,
we do,
how
Randy.
about you?
We'll miss it.
Oh my goodness. I try to be habit oriented instead of goal oriented. And so each year I build a little bit on the habits of the year before. And this year, oh my God, you guys, my life was completely transformed from a fitness perspective. I have to share. Listeners, angels, brave or cowardly, get yourself a treadmill desk. Not even funny. I lost 20 pounds without trying, without thinking about it, really without noticing until people started telling me. But yeah, they're just like this little platform that goes under my standing desk. You can find one on Amazon for $350. And so I am obsessed now with steps. So my goal for 2021 is just to continue this habit of around 15,000 steps a day. I like to get 20 when I can, and just, be really consistent about that and do some stretching and core work afterwards. And I feel fantastic and I want to keep that going.
Are you just walking though, or also like running / jogging?
I am walking. I'm not a runner. I want to take care of my...
I was wondering the same thing.
Yeah. Sometimes you'll see me on a Zoom call walking because I'm trying to, my Fitbit will bother me every hour that I don't get at least 250 steps in. Randy's nodding. Yeah. No, it's fantastic. There's no medicine like walking. Yep. Cool. The second habit that I want to keep building on is writing more letters to people. And my anchor points there are people's birthdays, because that's an easy excuse to send somebody a letter. I just write down all the dates at the beginning of the year and then set up reminders so that I can stay in touch. But my relationships are the most important things to me, and my friends. My friends are just everything. So I want to make sure I'm stewarding those relationships well, especially for the duration of quarantine, however long that continues.
Yeah, my dad keeps getting on me about the benefits of long walks. So I think you guys must be onto something.
Get a dog. That's
yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. They will drag you outside. Yep.
Well, for my part, my resolutions are pretty simple. One is to try to write more, and the other is to exercise more, but particularly in the AM before work, kind of like what you said, Randy. So maybe we can keep each other abreast of our progress in that domain.
So many accountability partners.
I know. Well, guys, this has been a pleasure. It's always nice to reflect, and it always heartens me just to hear how, heartfully and intentionally and thoughtfully people are going about our work, both in their professional and personal lives. And so I hope for anyone who made it all the way to this end of this podcast, mad props. Send us an email. Let us know what you think. And stay tuned for some exciting growth on the podcast front in 2020. We might even get a new jingle. So with that, let's put 2020 to bed and let's build a house united in 2021.
It's out.
Do it.
Yes.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year.
New Year.